This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal.
In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade.
It looks like one of those scenes of an old building being purposely dynamited and blown.
When we are successful, I'm just a patsy, and we will be.
We're ready to come to the microphone, so we'll listen up.
A new world order.
My name's Robbie Parker.
It might have appeared that way, but from my close-up inspection, there's no evidence of a plane having crashed anywhere near the Pentagon.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th.
President Kennedy died at 1 p.m.
Live from the Media Broadcasting Center.
This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, where I have the great pleasure of interviewing Nicholas Kollerstorm today. Nick is an expert in many different areas. He contributed to all 4 parts of the book, and I suppose we didn't go to the moon either, including on the moon landing, on Paul McCartney, on the replacement or the death of Saddam Hussein, and on the Holocaust. And today I thought we would begin by talking about a new development in relation to the Paul Fall controversy, and then turn to a discussion of the 7/7 London bombing attacks, because the July 7th, of course, is the observance of the event, and it's very fitting that we should talk about it, given that Nick is perhaps the world's leading expert on the bombing. Nick, let's begin with the Beatles. It was such a pleasure having a conversation with you recently, where the first slide is reflective of that event. It was the Real Deal episode number 70, and I so enjoyed it. Now, I think there's really little doubt about the replacement of Paul by Fall. And when we turn to the second slide, you see a photograph, both rather touching. I think this is one of your favorite photographs of Fall, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, right. Yes, Jim. Yeah, hi. Right. Well, this year, as you say, Jim, I've been focusing very much on this quite cheerful and happy conspiracy theory that brings back glad memories to old-timers of who the Beatles really were, and the tremendous creativity of that band, and the theme, which is very mind-blowing, that terrific creativity may have had some amazing death and transfiguration story at its core. That the key character actually passed away and got replaced. And this wasn't just an imposter. It's far more than an imposter. It's somebody who somehow got into the old identity of Paul and the real meaning and significance of the Beatles, and carried it forward. In some way, the albums produced after the replacement were at least as good, and some people think better, than the ones before. So this is an amazing story, and I feel, Jim, that it's just coming to the boil this year in an extraordinary way, and I suspect your articles might have something to do with it. For example, the Daily Mirror had 2 consecutive days where it did the Paul McCartney story, where that Ringo Starr story broke. You remember, earlier this year, I think it was March.
Yes.
And it did 2 successive days looking at this conspiracy theory, which is quite remarkable. And I find that it's much more a subject people are prepared to talk about, whereas a while ago it was something that was just totally outrageous, just annoyed people. So I think there's a time when these things for these things to develop and be recognised.
Well, in the next slide, we see a photograph of Paul and Fall, and it seems to me already, just by studying the differences in their skulls and the shapes of their faces and other features, where Paul had a more roundish face, a more boyish expression, and all this irrepressible exuberance, whereas Fall seems to be decidedly more mature. He has a longer, more oval countenance, and doesn't have that youthful, that boyishness about him, Nick.
Yeah. Yeah, he is clearly an older character. As he says in the Magical Mystery Tour, he does make a statement about his age then, as if he were some years older than the new guy, yeah.
It's fairly astonishing that you get remarks from him now and then are so completely revealing.
Yeah. I think he's a sort of honest character. I mean, he rescued the band, but he does want people, as far as possible, to have the opportunity of finding the truth. Even though the Beatles were always locked into this paradox that they wanted to tell the truth in all sorts of clues, but then they had to deny the truth because a vast financial empire would fall if the truth came out. And so that it always has to be officially denied. But in another sense, Paul wants to try and get across the whatever happened. You see here, we marked on the right hand eyebrow of Paul. Paul sometimes says in his Billy Shear's autobiography that he lifts up his eyebrow to look like old Paul, and he might be doing that a bit in this picture, you know.
In the Winged Beatles, there are a couple of revealing remarks, if you go through the whole thing, where he's essentially admitting that he is not one of the original members of the band. Yes.
And as we're on this date of 7/7, which reminds us of strange numerology used by the Empire, somebody somewhere takes numerology seriously, in funny number patterns when things happen in this 21st century. That Winged Beetle came out on 9909.
Did it?
Sorry, I'm getting confused. It came out on September the 11th, 2010. The Winged Beetle, right? Just before that Memoirs of Billy Shears came out on 9909, and that was the same day as across the Atlantic, all the Beatles numbers were brought out on in digital form. They were all remastered and sold as a complete package on that date. So we're getting numerology playing into this, with the astonishing September the 11th date coming into the story with the Winged Beetle.
And of course, for anyone just picking up on this now, 9/11, 1966 appears to be the date on which Paul McCartney died in an automobile accident. After having an argument with John in the studio, it was raining. He picked up a girl who was stranded in the rain. She was so excited at being in the vehicle with Paul that she distracted him. He ran a light. He was hit from the side by a vehicle and ran into a pole. She was able to get out, but Paul was trapped, and when the vehicle burst into flames, he burned to death. It's really quite a stunning story.
Yeah, as long as we realise it is a story, we have no evidence as such for it, apart from the clues that are put into the song. There's quite a lot of clues. For example, we don't have evidence of the wreck of the car, or the car being rescued, or, that sort of thing. Be nice if we did have some little bit of independent evidence, but that's just the way it is.
Here's another, as we look at the next slide, that reflecting the difference in their height. On the left, we have Paul with Jane Asher. On the right, we have Fall with Jane Asher. And I think some people have just been blown away by the idea that, there could have been a substitution. When look at Jane's expression, she certainly doesn't appear to be distraught or in distress.
She doesn't. No. She is an actress. Okay, you've got to remember this. She's a great British actress, and those two are both acting. They're both acting their parts, and maybe they got a bit carried away with acting their parts. But because the happy couple broke up, to the bewilderment of all the world. Why did they break up? But Jane was really Paul's girl,
But Fall seems to have fallen for Linda Eastman.
Yeah.
You gave the wonderful story of how she introduced herself to him. I just find that fascinating, Nick.
Well, okay, yeah. But Jane here was vital for Fall's credibility, you see?
Yeah.
She liked him, and him going around with her, that basically removed anyone's doubt that it was really the same guy.
Yeah.
That was terrific credibility.
So the Asher family played a crucial role in the deception.
They played a crucial role. It's probably her father guided her at this shattering moment to go with the replacement. I expect the father knew all about it. He's a top Tavistock Square hypnotist, psychiatrist. He would have known all about this and would have guided her. And then the new Linda, who was much more Fool's type. You see, she was in with all these. She was that queen of the groupie reputation. She'd done filming with Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix. She had photos of them all, and she was really into the whole pop world, which was the world that Fool lived in, whereas Jane never was. Jane was never in that world, and Jane wasn't really into smoking dope and stuff. So it was always a bit stressful, those two together. People who saw them together, Jane and Fool, said it all seemed a bit stilted.
Really? People said that?
Yes, Marianne Faithfull, who was with the Rolling Stones, she gives an account. She went to Cavendish Square and when they were together one evening. She said they never seemed terribly credible to her.
Did she realize that this was in fact not Paul James McCartney?
Well, I doubt it. She didn't. If she did, she didn't put it in any writing. I mean, the Rolling Stones obviously knew about the replacement, so who knows? Hard to say.
But they may have kept it to themselves as kind of a professional secret.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I think it's not quite the same as a blood oath, but bands understand that there are many vicissitudes, and for the sake of the show going on, and
also I suspect that the business of having doubles in showbiz is a lot more common than we suppose. That if you're just not up to doing an engagement and there's a huge amount of tickets have been sold, well, a double has to step in, and you can't just say, sorry, our star isn't up to it or whatever, or his throat isn't working today. So I suspect that the business of having doubles is part of something that professionals don't really talk about. You just kind of accept that they are going to pop up now and then. Maybe.
The next slide, the fifth slide, is from the study by the two Italian forensic scientists published in 2009, who set out to prove there was only one Paul and wound up proving the opposite. It was this forensic evidence that convinced me we were dealing with two people, Nick, and took it out of the realm of speculation and uncertainty.
Yes, well, you have managed to get the very hard to find text of this Italian investigation, and you published it in the book, which I think is a great help. And as you say, this is the one really careful analysis of the two different faces. It looks at things like teeth structure, for example, its conclusions do seem very reasonable. Yeah.
Yeah, I quite agree that Paul, the real Paul James McCartney, had bad teeth and a narrow palate. His replacement, Fall, had a normal palate and much better teeth. That their ears differ. We've already commented on the difference in their height. It's a really fascinating study, and as you've no doubt heard me observe, I mean, similarly with Saddam Hussein and his double, it was the teeth that were the crucial matter, where Saddam had excellent teeth and an overbite, where his upper teeth extended beyond his lower. But his replacement, after he had been killed on April 7th, 2003, in a raid on a restaurant on the outskirts of Baghdad by a B-1 bomber pilot who dropped 4 JDAM bombs. His replacement had bad teeth and an underbite, so his lower teeth extended beyond his upper. So the teeth turn out to be rather crucial in many of these cases, it seems to me, Nick.
Yeah, yes. And also, what anyone could see that Fall has a much larger forehead, a bigger head. Also got a bigger head, larger forehead. That is pretty obvious, really.
Pretty telling. And then, as you see in the next slide, number 6, there was a significant difference in their profiles as well.
Right. Paul, James Paul McCartney doesn't have very big sideburns, you know. There was a later phase when the Beatles all sported large sideburns, and one suspects that the original Paul would not, as this picture indicates, would not have had very large sideburns.
If you just look at their facial profiles, Nick, you know, notice they're very, very different. Fall has kind of a flatter profile. Paul has a more kind of classic profile. Their noses are somewhat different. Their chins seem to me to be significantly different.
Right, yeah.
And much of the long hair, don't you think, and the mustache actually was to conceal the replacement of Paul by Fall.
Definitely, yes. Paul had, right through the winter of 66 and the spring of 67, had a moustache, and the other Beatles also wore moustaches, as it were, in sympathy. And that people say that was to disguise signs of plastic surgery around the mouth. And his moustache came off in the summer of 67. So we see here without a moustache. Yeah.
I watched the video in the exchange we've just had, about which we are going to turn momentarily, from of the performance of Hello, Goodbye.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And it seemed to me, Nick, that in that particular video that Fall looks very, very different than Paul. That Fall looks a great deal like he must have looked before, you know, he became full-fledged. I mean, it's just very curious to me. I'm rather struck by that.
Yes, in that video, George, the real, genuine George Harrison, looks rather bewildered. I mean, I had some doubts whether it was really Lennon on the other side performing, but you thought it was. But whoever the guy is playing Paul McCartney doesn't look the slightest bit like him. You know, it looks
he really doesn't, does he?
Looks like some strange act. Yes.
Here in the next slide, number 7, you can see the striking difference in their appearance again. It's very interesting. I mean, the Fall has a good look. I mean, he's an interesting looking guy. He's just different than Paul.
Yeah, I'm slightly doubts about this Paul picture, actually. It's been very done up. Whitened, the eyes and teeth whitened.
You think this possibly has been an altered image of Paul?
Well, it looks a bit sort of done up, like for some fan magazine.
I think it was for a fan magazine. Yes, I think it was even on the cover.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they might have gone overboard with makeup or whatever.
Yes, it looks a little bit sort of done up and carefully attended to, whereas the full picture is much more genuine, a very soulful look. And I think you can see his green eyes there, can't you? In this picture, I think we can see he's got those big green eyes.
Oh yes. The difference in the color of their eyes is significant here, isn't it?
Yeah. Now, as we've been discussing, you first see those big green eyes in the Magical Mystery Tour, and they're shown very conspicuously, huge, very close up, while Lennon is singing "Nothing Is Real." Then, I think a year later, you see even greener eyes in the song "Hey Jude." Okay, so if you watch the video before singing "Hey Jude," you see a guy with big green eyes, I think even greener than in Magical Mystery Tour. And some people conjecture that in Magical Mystery Tour he's wearing sort of contacts just to give a more brownish colour to his eyes.
And that Magical Mystery Tour was even produced in order to introduce Fall as the replacement for Paul. Not in so many words, but just getting their fans used to this differences in their appearance in a context where they'd be uncritical and accepting.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's the whole meaning of this film, Magical Mystery Tour. If you don't understand that, you've really not a clue what this film is about. What is the magical mystery? It's introducing the new character and the duality of the Fool on the Hill and the Man with 1,000 Voices. The Fool on the Hill is the guy who never moves. He just watches the sun going round, and that is the dead, departed Paul. And the Man with 1,000 Voices who nobody seems to hear, is this very flexible, mutable singer who can do all sorts of different songs, different sounds in his voice, who moves in as the replacement. And Lennon says nobody seems to hear what he's saying, that nobody realises that he is the new guy, whatever sort of clues he drops.
A lot of fairly astonishing stuff coming out here, including those song lyrics about, Paul, how do you sleep? Nick, I was kind of blown away by that.
Well, I think that's very, very unfair. Lennon, I think when he went to New York with Yoko Ono, I think he got into a very, very bad negative condition. And also, it's just as a possibility, he once made a comment how he couldn't remember much about being with the Beatles. With the amount of heavy drugs and hard liquor he knocked back, that he actually blotted out quite a lot of his memory. Okay, I just suggest that as a possibility.
Well, could that have been a part in response to the deception? I mean, I feel that I feel that John and Paul were both inherently extremely honest people.
Yeah,
that great creativity requires somehow really soul-searching forms of honesty that aren't typical of others. And that it may have weighed heavily on John to ease the anguish of having to play a role that was so deceptive to the public that he resorted to drugs in a way he wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, he was totally shattered. Even during the Summer of Love and Peace, he talked about the latter half of that year of being depressed and having to cope with his depression, which is quite hard to figure out when he just made this staggering worldwide success of Sgt. Pepper. But he then turned to the kind of antithesis of Paul McCartney, which is Yoko Ono with her, ghastly, screeching sounds. Sorry, I'm coming back to this song you mentioned. He talks about how do you sleep at night. This is terrible accusations he's making against Paul. Okay, he says your voice sounds like Muzak to my ears.
Like Muzak,
Muzak, just canned music. Which is very cruel, I mean, Paul had done some brilliant songs on the White Album,
Yes.
Some absolute classics. And then he turns on his old deceased friend, James Paul McCartney, and says, the only thing you ever did was yesterday. And then he says, please note the line underneath that, the next line he says, but now you're gone, it's just another day. Okay? So he is saying that the guy who sang yesterday is now gone, and therefore the excitement has gone out of life, i.e. it's just another day.
Yesterday, of course, is the most widely recorded, maybe a song in history.
Yeah, well, there you go. It's quite staggering that a 23 or 22-year-old young man just composed that by himself. It wasn't a Beatles song, really. It was by himself. He just did that. And he got the tune, and then he didn't know what the words were. And he went round various people like Donovan and The Who and stuff. He'd play the song to them, just as a song, okay? And then he went to Spain with Jane, his girlfriend Jane, in this hotel. And while he was driving on the way to the hotel, he got the words, okay? So he's in this, there's a date when he reaches this hotel in Spain, and he's got the words of yesterday. And I think that's an amazing sort of story of creativity. So it came to one young man, yeah. Anyway, Lennon is kind of slagging him off, claiming that's all he ever did, which is an outrageous thing to say. And he goes on moaning about his colleagues in the band. He moans about Paul, something about you jump when your mama tells you to jump, doesn't he? He says you have to jump when your mama tells you to. So it's very unfair what he says about them.
Now, the new development, which is really the reason why I wanted us to begin here, is that there was a concert in Norway which was panned by the media as involving the wrong McCartney, that it was a fraud, that it was a bad forgery who was performing there. They fault the music, and they make quite a deal of it, Nick, and as you can see in slide number 8, This guy doesn't even look very much like Paul. It was on the 4th of July, and it was in a very famous town, Roskilde, one of the biggest and oldest Woodstock-inspired musical festivals in Europe, which is actually the old Viking capital of Denmark. This is fascinating. Yeah, Denmark.
Amazing,
not
yeah,
Norway.
amazing, yeah. Well, this has never happened before, that the newspaper article is called Scandal, The Wrong McCartney, and it says, a harmless doppelganger stole the show from the legend.
Yeah, isn't that?
Okay.
And why do they say was only seen in glimpses, Nick?
Only seen in glimpses, that's funny. And it says, instead of seeing the Beatles icon, the audience got, quote, nothing but a really bad forgery headlining the festival.
Isn't that stunning, Nick?
Yeah, so now we're wondering, this journalist, is he just saying that Fall is too old and can't do rock and roll anymore? Or is he saying that an actual different guy was put in?
I think he's saying an actual different guy was put in.
Yeah,
and therefore the audience was swindled because they were given a fake, not the real Paul, young, old, or indifferent.
Yeah, well, I think this is going to explode the story because, as this article points out, the Roskilde Festival should get a refund of some of the money, which is of the 2-digit million amount. That is the amount of money which was spent by fans to come and hear McCartney sing. And if this is a fraud, well, you know, this is sounds like a big legal action.
Yes.
I don't know if it's going to happen. Maybe it won't happen. But let's hope that rock fans don't just walk away from this. This is an explosive story. And I mean, it may have been that Fall was just too old and tired and ill, and he did let somebody else step in. And this guy doesn't look like much of a musician, does he?
No. Look at the next photograph, number 9. I found a more recent photograph of Fall to compare, and they just don't look alike at all. I mean, in my opinion, it's not even close.
It doesn't, no. Let's hope your contact can get 1 or 2 more pictures of him. You know, I think there must be some more pictures from that festival, and this is the only one we've got at the moment. Is that right?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
I have written to him to ask for more photographs. Now, the speculation that has passed through my mind, Nick, is that possibly this is intended as a distraction by introducing this fake version of Fall, that the position could be adopted by his entourage, by his associates, that this was the real controversy involved in talking about Paul having been replaced. When the real one is between Paul and Fall, they'll make it out that this is between Fall and the replacement in Denmark. You know, to minimize it, to make people think, well, somebody, showed up in Denmark and did this fake impersonation, and that's what people mean when they talk about a false Paul.
Right. Could be, yeah. I mean, this guy, for example, looks like he's got real hair. One assumes the Fall in his mid-70s is wearing a wig, but this looks as if this guy is quite a lot younger and might have real hair. And he doesn't look like much of a musician. I wouldn't have thought he was. But so I think we have to just watch out and see what's going to happen now.
Yeah, it's really quite fascinating development. And, of course, I was sent the article by someone who thought it might be that our work and I suppose we didn't go to the moon either, was having an impact. And in a way, that might be true in the background, even if this isn't the exact Paul Fall controversy we were talking about, that people becoming more aware of the issue might have been more open-minded in looking at this performer and recognizing he's not the real deal.
No, not the real deal. And let's just note what effect it had on the whole music festival. It said it ended up with a very sober and strangely apathetic mood over the festival square. So people thought they'd come and hear Paul McCartney, and they got this total mediocrity of performances, and old songs like the Magical Mystery Tours performed, and left totally disappointed audiences. So the Roskilde reputation now has been damaged by what has happened.
Yes.
You know, people expected some sort of magic treat and a big thrill in summertime, and instead they've had this. And the question now, which maybe affects the Danish government, I don't know, but is whether to do anything about it.
Yeah, it's very strange, and he concludes on the note, if the Roskilde Festival gets a refund on some of the money which they spent on the fraudster, Nick.
Yeah.
These can be appropriately invested in having John Lennon perform next year, when, of course, they know John Lennon is long since dead.
Yeah, well, that's quite a good analogy, you know.
Isn't that something?
That's quite something. So I think we need to, or we would like to be kept informed whether any other music, any other rock music, whatever outlets there are in Denmark, or to do with Roskilde, follow this up. Yeah, because there's nothing, let me say, there's nothing on Google at the moment about it. We've just been given, your colleague has given you this English translation, but it hasn't got into Google at all at the moment.
So we'll see if there's more here to follow up.
Yeah.
Well, I just thought, taking this occasion when we're reflecting on 7/7, that it was too opportune a moment, given this development, for us not to extend our conversation about Paul and Fall.
Yes, I mean, Paul has been ill a bit this year, hasn't he? There have been people worried about whatever it was.
I don't think the deception can be continued any longer, Nick. I think this event has to burst the bubble. You know, I mean, I think a deceit.
Yeah. What Fool said in this, assuming it's his autobiography, The Memoirs of Billy Shears, which he's sold for quite a high price, £35 or something, to stop too many people buying it. He says he wants the truth to come out, but he says he wants the story to remain underground until he is underground. So he doesn't want it too widespread. He wants to help the truth to come out, but he's not expecting to live very longer. That's what he said back in 2010, and therefore he wants this truth to start coming out. I think there's a bit of a motif like that. The various other big releases we've had with Rotten Apple, the Rotten Apple videos, which are wanting to help the truth to come out, but they can't say it too overtly. So there's a bit of a crisis here. So Fool's worst nightmare is that Yoko Ono will outlive him. Okay, that she will live on and be able to witter on about her story without anyone disagreeing with her, if she's the last survivor of the
and of course Heather Mills has a lot to say, which she's obviously eager to say, and has made a big to-do over having a box of evidence here that is going to be released if anything should happen to her. I mean, that's all very disturbing on multiple levels.
Well, it is, yeah, but she hasn't got anything to say about the Beatles as such. It's just her relationship and who she was in a relationship was, which somehow freaked her out completely.
But she explained it had nothing to do with infidelity or anything like that.
No, it's rather a bit of a mystery, quite what's going on there.
Really stunning stuff.
But as if you sometimes wonder, are there two fools around now? Two different guys who share out the load. And did Heather Mills somehow have a shock realizing this? That, for example, is one of the theories.
Well, let's turn to the... Since Nick and I recorded this interview on Monday, because he would be so much in demand in the UK as an expert on the 7/7 London bombings, which we discuss next, we have more information. that actually goes beyond the images I have shown you, the first of which bears no seeming resemblance to fall. The scandal, the fake McCartney, which neither Nick nor I felt was a good resemblance. But now we have an additional image in an article entitled, "Did the Wrong McCartney Show Up?" As you see here, where it's very clear that we're talking about Fall, the person we have all along considered to be the false Paul or the fake Paul. And I find the whole issue here raising these questions of whether the wrong McCartney showed up to be quite fascinating and stunning. Now, at least one student of the hypothesis Paul is dead, which I believe we have well established by this point in time, believes that this could be a form of satire, sarcasm, putting down the idea that Paul died on September 11th, 1966, in spite of the forensic and other evidence supporting it. So let me read part of the article, the first article, The False Paul, about the harmless doppelganger who stole the show from the legend, who only appeared in glimpses, to see whether that seems like a plausible interpretation or not. Contrary to everyone else, Paul McCartney did not have to show ID to enter the festival. This turned out to be a fatal mistake. Instead of the icon from the Beatles, a wax figure from Madame Tussauds sneaked up on the orange stage Saturday night and acted out a pretty weak forgery of the festival's uncontested lead name. At least this is how it looked during most of the marathon concert's 2 hours and 38 minutes. The real Sir Paul, whom we actually love because of all the old classics from before the first Roskilde Festival in 1971, only appeared in glimpses. Maybe the veteran at the age of 73 has become too old to stand and sit on a stage for that long, and I can testify to the fact that he was not the only one who had problems staying awake until 43 minutes in the morning, when golden slumbers put an appropriate end to the boredom. Disappointment in the air. It all started at 22:05 p.m., which of course is 10:05 p.m., with an amateurish version of Magical Mystery Tour, which left considerably more disappointment than magic hanging in the air in the beautiful Danish summer night. The song set the tone for a seance where McCartney's unmatched song treasure was left dull and sad in the dust of Zealand, the Danish island of Ceylon, which in direct translation means soul land. It is undeniably somewhat of an accomplishment to make such good songs sound so indifferent, irrelevant, and, well, weak. I find it difficult to reconcile that commentary with the interpretation of this being a satire or a put down, though it most certainly could be construed as meaning that the performance was so bad, so pathetic, that it might as well be that this is not the real Paul McCartney. And indeed, under either interpretation, we know it is not. My source, Jens Engelsgaard, also sent me four videos from the concert, which confirm my belief now, given the additional evidence, that we're not talking about a fake Paul McCartney, but simply the original fake McCartney. And now stand by for the continuation of my conversation with Nick about the London 7/7 subway bombings. London 7/7 bombing attacks, where I featured 7/7 ripple effect, which runs almost exactly 1 hour, and your interview with David Shaler back in The Real Deal episode number 13.
Oh, right, yes.
Which is, featured there in image number 10. And I just say, Nick, I've been so impressed by your work on this subject that I've been very much looking forward to addressing it with you here today. And where some may be unaware how you broke the back of the official account by discovering that the train from Luton that these young men would have had to have taken to be at the tube stops at the appointed time that the explosions were going to take place had been canceled that day, and therefore it wasn't even physically possible for them to have been participants. This is such stunning stuff. And
yes, that did have a lot of effect. As you say, Jim, it was the perfect crime, had been meticulously planned, and the one thing they hadn't figured out that kind of broke apart their story was this picture we're looking at here is four lads, I'm just about to see four lads, getting into a station called Luton, which is about 40 miles north of London, and they were supposed to catch a train at 7:40.
The next slide is better for you to discuss number 11 because it's.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah.
Check that out, Nick, and go ahead with the explanation of its significance.
Yeah, so you see the timestamp here, 7705, and this is actually a very much fiddled picture. People have pointed out various things, obviously photoshopped and fiddled about with, quite whether the four were there or what, but. They were supposed to have caught the train, which then turned out not to have been cancelled that day, and all the other trains were very much delayed. So they could not have got in. If this timing is here correct, they would not have got to London in time for the bombs to go off. The bombs started going off about 10 minutes to 9 in London, and it would have been too much of a rush for them to.
Here it's about 7:22.
Yeah.
And to get 8:50.
They would have supposedly caught the. Well, there was a 7:25 train. Question. Let's not go into all the question of exactly what trains there were, but they would have been. The trains were very much slowed down, and a lot of discussion, was there a 7:24 or 7:25 train? If they just go in now, could they have got the tickets and everything? So the timing didn't work. This whole picture, if we should look at this picture for a minute, just the way it's fiddled. If you see, it's perfectly dry in the foreground, and then there's a line across it, and then there's rain beyond there. Okay?
Yes.
So there's no overhead roof to make that distinction, that one part is dry and the other part's wet. There's absolutely no roof there. And that's an example of a clearly fiddled with part of the picture. And there's quite a lot that's kind of screwy about this picture.
But they use this to claim that they got aboard the train. Had it not been canceled, this would have been regarded as important evidence.
Yeah. There's a four lads from Leeds, none of them any particular interest in politics, and it's very likely they were invited or persuaded to take part in a terror drill, thinking they were somehow helping their country or they'd get paid a bit of money for it, and they like the excitement of coming up to London, and the guy in the middle looks like he's got some sandwiches or something, So it's quite likely they thought there was some sort of day out that they were having.
It's very interesting you mentioned about this photograph having been altered, because we have photograph from the Boston Marathon that purports to be of the two brothers, and there are a couple of rather striking features about it. One is that the older brother, Tamerlan, is clean-shaven, whereas Aunt Moret wrote to me to say that actually that this had been photoshopped, that this was a fabricated film because he had a beard at the time. And Nick, she started sending me, a photograph of him lying in bed with his cat. He has a beard. a link to a video from a gymnasium where he and Zoker are working out. He has a beard. A friend of his called him after the bombing, relieved to discover he had been nowhere in the vicinity, and they had dinner together that night, and he had the beard. And there's a convenience store footage where Zoker's inside and Tamerlan outside. He has the beard. In the footage of him being arrested, Nick, where he's stripped naked and put into a police car, if you can get a version that hasn't been fuzzied up, he's got the beard. And then we have the photograph of the naked body with the huge gash in the side. You look closely, he's still got the beard. So I think she made a powerful case that footage, even the marathon footage, which has to be perhaps the most basic evidence the government would rely upon, is fabricated.
Or that it has some other guy there without a beard.
Well, it looks like it's Tamerlan, but he just doesn't have a beard. So he's been introduced as Photoshop. Plus, get this, because these young lads, of course, are wearing backpacks too. I asked a professor of law to focus on what he thought was the most important evidence of all of that I had put together, and he zoomed in on the backpacks because, Nick, the FBI investigation said that the two backpacks that exploded were both black nylon backpacks. In the indictment for Zoker for the Boston show trial, it says they were black nylon backpacks, but we have photographs of them, and neither of them is wearing a black nylon backpack, which led the professor to conclude that there wasn't even probable cause for an arrest or an indictment, much less a conviction.
Right. Well, those are two wonderful lads, those two. One was studying philosophy, the other was a 9/11 Truth guy. And he had a very beautiful girlfriend, and he was also studying a boxer, wasn't he? He was training to be in some U.S. boxing team.
Yes.
So none of them were, neither of them were, that into politics or in any way anti-establishment or anti-American. They're both really glad to be there, the whole fictional story was woven around them as being, terrorists, and you get much the same with these four lads here. None of the people who knew them found any trace of terrorist or even political interest. Only one of them was religious, and the others were easygoing types who liked to, madly keen on playing cricket, wanted to get their grades at the college, talked about their girlfriends, talked about the clothes they bought, liked to smoke a bit of dope, and that was their life. There wasn't some dark, shadowy secret. That the media then tried to make out, that they tried to make, Khan has been off to America, he's been off to Israel. Well, no, he hadn't actually. He's hard-working school teacher, and his wife was a beautiful young wife, just having a second child from him, and he had no motive whatever. He was a very, very universally admired young man in the Beeston neighbourhood of Leeds, and mothers would trust their little girls to be taken to school by him. He would drop by and pick up kids to take to the local school, and he was trusted and admired by people who knew him. And then they tried to make out there's this dark, shadowy side that actually isn't there. It really isn't.
Another aspect of this, which is dumbfounding to me, is how he's found dead with this huge gas in his side after he has been arrested by the police, Nick. Now, the official story has it his brother ran over him with his SUV, but how would that be possible once he'd been arrested?
I mean, are we allowed to say that they were taken to a Jewish hospital whilst they're alive and then they had his heart cut out? Is that the gash down the side of his chest you're talking about?
It could well be, Nick, because the whole thing is just stunning. But, I mean, the American people can't put two and two together, it would seem, Nick, because he's arrested and then he turns up dead. So how could his brother have possibly been responsible for his death once he'd been taken into police custody?
And the idea that the brother would run him over, I mean, how do people believe this stuff? Anyway, he's been found guilty, hasn't he? He's been found guilty and put in jail.
Yes.
What, for life? For life?
I think he's going to be given the death penalty.
Oh, right. But the important thing is, with these patsies, that no journalists are allowed to speak to them. They must not be allowed to state their point of view. And so they're either killed or they're put away for life. and they'll be heavily
I've
judged up.
submitted a formal complaint to the California Bar about the conduct of Judy Clark, his defense attorney, who, while pleading him innocent in her opening statement, said that they did it. I mean, that's grotesque because we have all kinds of evidence proving they did not do it.
Yeah, well, good for you, Jim, yes.
Let's proceed with 7-7. Now,
Okay, right.
The next photograph is of the bus because, as you well know, of course, in addition to the 3 tube stops, a bus was subjected to an explosion. Tell us about it.
Well, it was the bus blowing its top that gave the theme of bombs going off, because in the tubes there was some sort of explosions, trains got lifted off the tracks, various electrical experiences were had by people inside of very horrific nature, but there weren't actually witnesses saying bombs going off. You really couldn't find any such witnesses. None of the people coming out of the tube knew or believed that bombs had gone off, whatever they thought had happened. So the bus looked very much like a bomb going off. The top did lift off and a puff of smoke came out, and 2 or 3 people were apparently dead. Quite a lot of people at the top deck looked as if they weren't that bothered, but a few people were really dead, and as you can see from this picture, it was pretty damn scary, whatever the hell happened. I think there's got exotic technology here. That's my suspicion. There's no localized evidence of where a bomb was or where a bomb went off. Anyway, the Empire. Sorry.
No, in the trains, the tube trains, we have the explosion coming from underneath the carriage upward, so that the metal is bent up and into the cabin rather than down and out.
Yeah, we do. And also the Edgware Road coach, that is the train where witnesses said it lifted clean off the rails. It's quite clear that you have 3 different holes in the main coach that gets attacked, and you get grueling, horrifying accounts of people being entrapped in those 3 different holes. And neither of those holes are particularly near where the alleged terrorist Mohammed Sadiq Khan was sitting, and you got no credible witnesses whatever of any terrorists on any of these coaches. So the actual evidence points to a totally different narrative. Okay, if we come onto the bus here, which blew off about an hour later, you can see on the ad, outright terror, bold and brilliant, and the film is called The Descent. You can't see the full advert here, The Descent. Now, this was a film that was due to open, I think, the day after 7/7, and it had to be delayed because its theme was too similar. It had people trapped underground and dying as a scary horror movie. So too similar what actually happened, so it had to be delayed, its launch.
Did you ever see the film?
I didn't get around to it now. But it reminds one a bit of that film, V for Vendetta, okay? That famous, terrific smash hit all around the world, V for Vendetta. And that was filmed in the London Underground in the months leading up to 7/7, okay? 2005.
Yes.
The months leading up to 7/7, and that was about a underground train primed to blow up, and it was driven underneath the Houses of Parliament.
To blow up Parliament, yes.
Yeah. So you had Warner Brothers lurking around the London Underground doing filming of a train that was designed to blow up, and I think that was a vital part of the sort of background preparation for this event, you know. And likewise, let me just add, that was due to be launched later in 2005, and it had to be delayed because the story of it was too similar to what had just happened with the London bombings.
V for Vendetta also had to be delayed?
Yeah, that was launched in 2006, and then the main photographer of V for Vendetta mysteriously died towards the end of 2005, but before the film was launched. And then, as you know, it's a worldwide success.
That's pretty weird, though, isn't it, Nick?
Well, it is. I think it's very, very synchronous and very ironic, because V for Vendetta is discussing the question: will the government kill its own citizens?
Yes.
For difficult questions of control, and it comes from comes out from a comic. It's a comic story, but it's given, the film is given much more modern relevance with this great and terrible question of whether a government will blow up its own citizens.
Is there any way in which the bombing could have been intended to delay the release of V for Vendetta?
Well, I wouldn't quite put it like that. I would say that the empire does signal what it's doing through films. Just as with 9/11, you got The Matrix with the main character, Neo. 70 minutes of the film, you see his passport flick open when he's being interrogated, and you see the date, 9/11/2001. You see that given as the date on his passport for his birth. That comes out in 1998, just a couple of years before the 9/11 event happens. I think we could give quite a lot of examples of the way films that the empire is somehow prefiguring it, as you looked into with the whole Sandy Hook thing, Jim. There was some macabre hints in movies, weren't there, with Batman and stuff.
Yes.
So this seems to be something that just does happen. Some people think the empire has to tell you in advance what it's going to do. When these great terror events happen, they are somehow indicated in films.
In the 14th slide, we're looking at the facade of a building. Tell us about this, Nick.
Okay, well, hang on. Aren't there two pictures of the bus?
Yeah, there are two pictures of the bus. I thought we hit them both.
Let me just say with the second one, if I can just go back to that for a minute.
Sure.
The second one, you notice the top of the bus is very, very level. That's where it's been cut off. It's much too level. Okay? So a lot of people think that whole top of the bus was primed to blow up and be lifted off. And then you can also...
It was a normal double-decker, or was it an open-top double-decker?
No, it wasn't a double. No, it was a normal double-decker, but this line is much too smooth, where the whole top is lifted off, and it's obviously been primed and pre-cut, so it lifts off quite easily.
Yes.
And you can see somebody standing up on the top deck.
Yes.
Those people were standing up after the blast. There was some blood. They were bleeding a bit. Nose is bleeding, but you know, in many ways, they didn't seem that bothered, and certainly not badly damaged. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's. If we want to come on to the next one now.
Yeah, slide number 14. Yes.
Okay. Now this is an extremely strange bit of the story. This is the BMA, British Medical Association headquarters in Tavistock Square, and the bus was maybe supposed to blow up in front of this, and there's a lot of fake blood scattered around that door. I don't know if you can quite see, but it's maybe, I don't know, pig's blood or whatever, but people felt it indicated some sort of dark ritual meaning or whatever. The bus is actually about 10 or 15 yards further on, perhaps it went a bit further, and you can't credibly see how any blood from the bus exploding kind of got onto this door.
In the next slide, Nick, you can actually see some of that blood.
Yeah, that's the point. Yeah, next you see Tavistock. This is the Tavistock Square, famous Tavistock clinic where war trauma was investigated, psychology clinic, and it's believed a whole lot of mind control techniques come out from the Tavistock Institute. Well, this is where it used to be, in Tavistock Square.
What we're seeing there, dark on the top right, for example, that's supposed to be blood from the explosion?
Absolutely, yeah. That is supposed to be splattered around, that it's somehow come off the bus. But for whatever reason, the bus stopped about 10 yards further on, so it's not really credible, okay?
Whoever was driving the bus got the script wrong.
Yeah, whoever's driving the bus got the script wrong. And quite obviously, that blood should have been analysed. What is it, human blood or not? No, probably not. And quite obviously, the British Medical Association will be very well equipped to do so. But obviously, that sort of thing doesn't happen.
How outrageous! I mean, one after another. These are offensive frauds, Nick, because they're so blatant. They're such obvious fakes.
Yes, well, it's a strange sort of. Some people think this is a strange ritual concept of trying to scare people with blood spattered. When, as you say, it's obviously fake. They reckon 13 people died with that gas explosion, but I went over all the photographs after the event, and there was only 2 or maybe 3 bodies lying around that bus. There weren't a lot of deaths.
That's very striking, because in Boston bombing, you have when you look through the haze, the smoke, and you see some bodies with missing arms and legs. There's no blood, And when you count up the number, there may be 10 or 12 who are there that are crisis actors with no limbs. The blood only starts showing up later. It's fake blood, Hollywood blood. But by the time the newspapers are done with it, they talk about some 260 persons having been injured and 3 having been killed. No one could have been killed by that puff bomb. I'm a former artillery officer, Nick, and it's just ridiculous to think that whatever happened there could have killed people. In fact, Nathan Folks, who's a Hollywood producer and director who blew the whistle on a key player, the tall fellow in the cowboy hat, whose name is Carlos Arredondo, whom he cast in one of his own films, was himself an actor, and you see him waiting around to get involved in accordance with his script. I mean, it's all so blatant. He thinks it was actually done by a smoke machine, not by even an explosion at all.
Right, yeah. Well, here in Tavistock Square, on the morning of 7th July, there were actors hanging around. There are people totally bandaged up, for example, much too early. They couldn't have gone anywhere to get bandaged. So there was some sort of terror drill going on that morning that a fellow called Peter Power was involved with. And you see people around, say, King's Cross, and people have noticed some people, as it were, acting out a script. But let's emphasise there were real deaths at this event, 7/7. The number 52 was fixed much too early. That was a kind of pre-scripted total they wanted for numerological reasons. It's the number of cards in a pack of cards, 4 lots of 13. And there were 13 here at Tavistock Square. Allegedly, that's what the plaque says. Okay.
I love this image on slide number 16. Make sure you've got your identity cards to be found after the bombs go off.
Yeah, well, this is the phantom hallucination of Muslim terrorists that is, in a way, the aim of the whole exercise. You want to have this ID. Now, Mohammed Sadiq Khan, his identity cards were found on 3 different sites. Was it Edgware Road, Aldgate, and where was it? King's Cross.
And of course, he was purported to be the leader of the gang.
Yeah, and then at the inquest, they cleverly managed to find his ID at a 4th place. So you've got Tavistock Square as well as the 3 tube lines. Edgware Road and Aldgate and Russell Square, all allegedly having ID of Mohammed Sadiq Khan. Now, this is a totally absurd message. It's totally absurd, and it's the way I see it. The perps telling you this is just a made-up story. You know, it's a way of signalling that this story is inherently absurd and never happened by having ID remains. I mean, in all of the stories here of people getting blown up, you've got the terrorists, the alleged terrorists, say at Aldgate, who was it? Tanweer, I think. There's no trace of him at all, okay? And they try to tell you, he's blown up into so many different bits that you can't recognise him or you can't find him, or no post-mortem analysis of the count of the bodies finds him there. They can count all the other bodies, but they don't count him. So there's no trace of those 4 alleged Muslims on the trains at all. But oh yeah, their ID remains, of course. Of course, you can see their driving licence and so on, and their mobile phones. Oh yeah, of course. Maybe they just threw them all on the floor before blowing themselves up. You know, you get this daft logic.
It's just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous, Nick. It's insulting.
Yeah. It is. Yeah, it's just
it's so incredibly stupid.
Yeah, they get the mobile phone or ID of these lads somehow, and just put them in with the alleged evidence. And we don't have. There's no intelligent critique of these mad, stupid stories. They give them to journalists. The journalists tell them, and we've never had any evaluation. There's never been any public inquiry. You know, there's something called a coroner's inquest where people allegedly hear the evidence, but nobody evaluates it. You know, nobody says this is totally absurd and doesn't make any sense at all. There's nobody around to say that. Okay.
Really unbelievable. Well, the next image, I take it, is the leader of the gang and his wife.
Yeah, this is the happy young Mohammed Sadiq Khan, who is a very outstanding citizen, and his beautiful young wife. She was Indian, and her mother was a very influential woman in the neighbourhood, often consulted by the police for any problem with race relations around the Beeston area of Leeds. Hasina and Farida Patel. So the mother of his wife was a very, very wise, distinguished lady in the neighbourhood, and they were more Indian, and Khan more Muslim from Pakistan. The four lads, I think they generally had all Pakistani connections, and she was just bearing his second child. Let me get this right. She had a first child off him, and there's an incredibly poignant moment, an amazing fate, whereby she has to go into hospital days before 7/7, just a few days before, and he and Tanwir rented a car. They've rented a car, so they drive her quickly in hospital. She's in acute labour pains, and then there's the agony. She has the terrible agony that her man vanishes. Her man vanishes on the 6th of July. She never sees him again after that. She keeps phoning him, "What's happened to you?" So he has gone. Now, as I see it, he never went down to London that day. They got him on the 6th, and she then had a very tragic miscarriage on the morning of the 7th, morning of July the 7th. I think it's a very moving part of the story that isn't widely told or described. I think that miscarriage was an expression of her despair as it dawned on her that she wasn't going to see her man again.
What do you think happened to him, Nick?
Well, I think that he put out a signal to the person managing them. Sorry, look, my wife is in labour pains now, and I'm sorry I had to pull out of this agreement of going up to London for this drill, but I'm sure the other lads will manage it all right without me. So he thought he could just pull out, because he was told it was just, some sort of drill to earn a bit of money, and didn't realise the terrible meaning of it. He thought he could just pull out, but he couldn't. He couldn't.
Of course, that would have been that he was there as a live witness to explain what had actually happened and how they'd been conned and then blamed for an event over which they had no control.
Yeah, he couldn't pull out. That was his sort of death sentence. So they got him on the 6th, and they might have bumped him off then.
Did his body turn up?
Well, that is part of the mystery. What happened to the bodies? If only we could get... I mean, I would love to be able to talk to this woman who's still alive. She's remarried, changed her name, living in Sheffield, and she applied to be allowed to give evidence at the inquest, and he wasn't allowed to. I mean, I would dearly love to be able to just have a quiet chat with her. I think she obviously knows very well what's happened. For example, I think a year or so after, or sometime after the event, she was given a will by Khan. It was a typed out will, where he apologises for his private behaviour and stuff. It's obviously completely phony. And I think her comments would be invaluable if anybody could get them. But therefore she is closely guarded, and various of us have made quite an effort to find out where in Sheffield she might be, but nobody can find her. In general, you can't really talk to these families much. They've been so heavily guarded and so heavily fed with propaganda, to make them believe the official story. It's rather strange.
Well, the next is rather remarkable to me. This kayaking or what have you, the rafting on a river. Tell us about this, Nick.
Well, hang on. What about the car? Isn't there a...
No, that's next. That's after this.
Kayak. Okay. Well, Khan, Hamid Sadiq Khan, is here with Tanwir. I think Tanwir's on the left-hand side, and Khan has got a V sign. It's called whitewater rafting, and one of the things Khan was rather good at was getting people off drugs. There's heroin epidemics all around where he lived in Leeds, and he was good at this cold turkey stuff, getting them out, either just putting them in a room for some days where they couldn't take any drugs, or taking them out either mountain climbing or whitewater rafting. And here, Khan is the boss of this outing, and you can see lads here having a hell of a good time. This was just a short time before the London bombings happened, this is what Khan was really good at, taking some kids out, some young men out, so they all had a wonderful time.
This is very distressing, Nick, because everything you're telling me about this man suggests he was like a tremendous benefit to the community. He was a positive, contributing guy. This wasn't some lowlife, someone who might be expected to be ensnared in an actual plot to blow up some subway trains. I mean, it's ridiculous. He was a model citizen.
Model citizen. Oh, yeah, he would have been in local politics if he'd been allowed to live. He was a kind of rising star. For example, he went, I think he was shown around the House of Commons by Tony Benn's son, and Tony Benn's son came to there was a healthy living centre just around them that they invited him over to. And also the school where he's working at, Khan got a glowing recommendation from the headmistress there. Khan and that headmistress of the school he was working at were featured in the Times Educational Supplement as an example of an up-and-coming school in that area, coping with all the local problems. And Khan was interviewing kids for the school to see who was suitable for the school. So those two actually got in the Times Educational Supplement, which is quite remarkable. And the headmistress of the school spoke out on behalf of Khan, spoke well of him, even after he was being demonised by the media and making up all their stories about him. She was saying what a great influence he was on the school.
This is just appalling. It's like the young men in the Boston bombing. They were excellent human beings. They weren't lowlifes. They didn't deserve any of this.
Well, perhaps that's why they're chosen. Perhaps the empire doesn't want Muslims who will have some, great character and distinguished future. Perhaps that's part of what's going on,
The next slide shows the car, Nick. Tell us about it.
All right. Well, this is the little Nissan Micra that they're supposed to have driven from Leeds all the way down to the station at Luton. And they're three big burly lads. And they had these backpacks. Backpacks are supposed to be deadly explosive. And this rather unstable explosive they're supposed to have in the backpacks needed refrigerating. Get this. So they're supposed to have refrigerating equipment or loads of ice cubes or something to keep the backpacks cool.
It gets more and more absurd, doesn't it?
Well, it does, yeah. The explosive kept changing with, not that Britain's amnesiac journalists were bothered by that, but the story kept changing with different explosives that were supposed to be used. And much of the time it was this unstable explosive that needed cooling, and people were rather doubtful whether you could fit those three lads in that little car, which was then left at Luton. It really was at Luton car park with a parking ticket on it,
where it could be conveniently found and identified. But of course, they didn't get on the train, so.
Well, they might have got on a much later train.
Yes, yes.
When it was found and identified, they made up a whole lot of bombs and sinister stuff in the car. Explosives and bombs and grenades and stuff were alleged to have been left in the car.
See, that's the decisive proof, Nick, right there, the car and its contents.
Well, it's a decisive proof that it's being fiddled with, that you get a story that's being made up.
I agree, but that's the way they wanted to use the car. It's like the contents of the luggage of Muhammad Atta that somehow didn't make it aboard the flight, where they had a list of his 19 co-conspirators. It's absurd.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's crappy.
It's not even a B. It's not even a B grade movie, Nick.
No, it's not even a bigger movie, but it's good enough for a British journalist. The British journalist can be told this and will print it, and it's supposed to scare the hell out of you. And that is the story we're told. Just be afraid, and if it sounds odd, well, they are Muslims. This is how Muslims behave.
In our next to last slide, Nick, I take it this is the symbol for the Gladio program. Tell us about it.
Yes, this is. I think this this logo here it comes from the Gladio movement. This is the stay behind armies of NATO, and this is very much, I think, the source of hidden terror in Europe. NATO was supposed to protect us against the communist menace, but if people weren't sufficiently frightened of the communist menace, they had to be made more frightened, because otherwise they might stop them voting in left-wing governments. And the terrible thing NATO did, Gladio did, in this hidden form of hidden armies, was to start blowing up the Bologna railway station in 1980 in Italy. And there are various dreadful atrocities happening in Italy, supposed to scare the Italian people and supposed to be blamed on communists, the Red Brigade.
But perpetrated by the government.
Yeah, but by NATO. Well, but by military elements within NATO and Masonic lodges. I'm not sure it was the government as such, but it may have gone back to Henry Kissinger, who announced that we cannot have Italy electing a communist government. Italy was about to form a coalition government with the communists in power, forming part of a government, and I think that the Bologna bombings were designed to stop that, because if we had got the communists in government, then we wouldn't have to hate and fear the enemy. We see them being a part of civil life, you know.
Right.
And we wouldn't need huge military budgets.
Another political party akin to the Republicans and the Democrats.
Yeah, we wouldn't need to spend enormous amount of money in cruise missiles and everything.
God forbid the people should not want to spend staggering sums of money on military defense spending, Nick.
Well, right, yeah. So that was the original horrific manifestation of Gladio. And Italy then, in the next decade, it became the one country in Europe that very thoroughly investigated the whole thing. The Italian government exposed the Gladio initiative, and it discussed it in European forums, and it said, if we want any worthwhile future in Europe at all, we've got to expose and root out this hidden military, which is seems to have a will of its own, and this thing has to be exposed.
Just as I believe it was Italy's highest elected leader who denounced 9/11 as an inside job. I mean,
exactly, yeah. That's a good analogy, and I think they were doing that because they had that tradition of having openly exposed the whole Gladio thing, and therefore it's more thinkable in Italy than it would be in other countries in Europe. I mean, I think the great need now, Jim, in Europe is for the different truth movements or just intelligentsia in Europe to get together and discuss the various forms of fabricated terror to which they've been exposed. You know, we've had Charlie Hebdo in Italy now, and
in France,
in France, and we had the London bombings, we had the Spanish railway stations being blown up, and we had Amsterdam, the pretend shoot down, the passenger plane being shot down, a whole lot of question marks around that in the Ukraine.
Just think how different the world would be and how much more comfortable life would be and the quality of life would be so much better were it not for these covert operations taking place to instill fear into the population to manipulate us for political purposes.
Yeah. Each country needs some sort of ministry of peace which can oppose these furtive, secretive processes which ministries of war are actually developing. The military budgets are far too large, and because they're far too large, they create these theatre of terror and fear to keep everybody wanting to invest money in the military. I mean, we're having now NATO spending is all going up because of the pretense of Russia being an enemy, and we're made to think that we've got to spend more money in the military, whereas actually military intelligence has turned against us. It's undermining our whole quality of life. Ever since 9/11, which is the defining event of this new millennium, we have had a fake narrative from military intelligence.
Nick, I can't thank you enough for a stimulating, really wonderful conversation. We conclude with the last slide, the cover of your book, now in the third edition, Terror on the Tube. I highly recommend everyone to obtain a copy. You're just doing such splendid work, my friend, and you made such wonderful contributions to our new book, and I suppose we didn't go to the moon either. I can't thank you enough.
Well, thanks very much, Jim. Yeah. Let's hope we stimulate some people to discuss these matters on which our futures so much depend.
This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal. Thanking my special guest, Nick Kollerstorm, for being here and encouraging all of you to stand by for the next installment of the new JFK show, which is continuing to feature the study of the assassination that I produced in 1994, believe it or not, JFK, the assassination, the cover-up, and beyond. Stand by, we'll be right back. This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal.
In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade.
It looks like one of those scenes of an old building being purposely dynamited and blown.
When we are successful, I'm just a patsy, and we will be.
We're ready to come to the microphone, so we'll listen up.
A new world order.
So my name's Robbie Parker.
It might have appeared that way, but from my close-up inspection, there's no evidence of a plane having crashed anywhere near the Pentagon.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th.
President Kennedy died at 1 p.m.
Live from the Media Broadcasting Center.
The evidence we have discovered indicates that at least 6 shots were fired in Dealey Plaza on the 22nd of November, 1963. That Jack Kennedy was hit in the back by a shot from behind, that he was hit in the throat by a shot from in front, that he was hit in the head by a shot from behind, that he was hit in the head by a shot from in front, that John Connally was hit at least once and possibly twice, and that a bystander by the name of James Tigg was also hit by yet another shot. That indicates that any reconstruction of the assassination that posits less than 6 shots cannot be taken seriously, because the official government reports, both the Warren Commission in any of its 4 different versions and the House Select Committee on Assassinations report in its specific 4-shot scenario involving 2 misses and 2 hits, cannot be taken seriously. We have found that a very plausible reconstruction of events in Dealey Plaza, which appears to be generally corroborated by the new medical evidence, is the scenario presented by Richard Sprague in his computer reconstruction published in Computers and Automation in May 1970. We have also discovered that the most likely scenario for the assassination to take place as it appears to have taken place would have involved Secret Service participation. Some of the most disturbing evidence of Secret Service complicity can be found in a videotape that was prepared around 1988 by a fellow named William Cooper, who was very disturbed about the assassination and who believed that the truth about the assassination had been systematically concealed from the American people. The Cooper tape is a study of the behavior of the Secret Service agents who were in control of the presidential limousine in Dealey Plaza, namely William Greer, the driver, and Roy Kellerman, his assistant. In order to understand the Cooper tape, however, it's valuable for us to take a look at the Zapruder film itself. As most Americans are aware, a businessman by the name of Abraham Zapruder and his secretary were in Dealey Plaza and were actually standing on a low colonnade overlooking the grassy knoll and Elm Street, and took a very short motion picture that is no doubt the most famous motion picture ever taken in American history. And it shows the key events of the assassination, or at least it appears to show them. No doubt you will notice two women standing near the limousine at about the moment of the fatal shot to the head. The one in a red coat is Jean Hill, while the woman beside her is Mary Mormon, who is taking a photograph with a Polaroid camera. Here come the motorcycle patrolmen now. The limousine has rounded the corner. Shots are ringing out. Several more shots. You're about to see the fatal headshot. Now the vehicle speeds up, heads off to Parkland Hospital. The Cooper tape now, which you're about to see, misdescribes several features of the situation. For example, he suggests that Jackie Kennedy was climbing out of the limousine to try to get away from the shooter. But in fact, Jackie was climbing after a big chunk of Jack's brains that had blown across the back of the limousine. In fact, later at Parkland Hospital, she would nudge one of the physicians and ask him if this would help while handing him the brains in her hand. Plus, he also suggests that Jackie saw the shooter and knew who it was. But in fact, at the time of the fatal headshot, she was looking almost directly into Jack Kennedy's face and surely would have been oblivious of whomever might have fired the fatal shot. In addition, Cooper suggests that Clint Hill was rushing forward to push Jackie back into the limousine. But in fact, if you look carefully, you can see that Jackie herself comes back into the limousine once she's got what she was after, and that Clint Hill never has to apply any pressure to her. Nevertheless, the question is not what William Cooper may have not understood about the assassination, but whether he might have noticed something that other students of the assassination have overlooked.
Nearly 25 years ago, the people of the United States and the world were shattered by the impact of an assassin's bullets upon the helpless, unsuspecting young President of the United States, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. The horrendous wound inflicted by those bullets has penetrated deeply into the body and soul of America, destroying the very lives of thousands and the heart and trust and political will of literally millions. In the years that have passed since this tragic event removed from the world stage perhaps one of the most promising human agents of peace and progressive political development, we have been fed one officially sanctioned lie after another, beginning with a blue ribbon cover-up commission to a castrated Senate Select Committee seeking to shed light upon an event deliberately enshrouded in deception, concealment, and outright falsehood. 25 years is long enough. It is time the truth was finally told, in the earnest hope that it will truly set us free of the murderers who pose as our protectors. What we're observing here is the motorcade in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. As the presidential car passes behind the freeway sign, President Kennedy is struck in the throat by a bullet that was fired from the grassy knoll. As he's grasping his throat, John Connally is turning around to his right. He at that point is struck. You notice the the passenger of the car turning back to see what has happened to the president. As he turns back to the front, the driver of the car turns with his left arm over his right shoulder with a pistol and fires. You see the 45 caliber nickel-plated automatic weapon in his left hand. He's firing over his right shoulder. You see it in relief. You see his head pointing backwards towards the president. In this enhanced close-up, you see the impact of the bullet upon the president. The force of the shot drives him violently backward against the back of the seat. You see Mrs. Kennedy react in horror. The ugly gaping wound, which is evident here, according to many observers at the scene, was actually created on the print. This was not the actual nature of the wound. But you notice that Mrs. Kennedy wasted no time in trying to exit the vehicle because she clearly was able to determine exactly where that shot had originated, and it was her personal bodyguard, Clint Hill, another Secret Service agent, who attempted to keep her in. What the arrow is indicating here is what appears to be the outline of a man, a hat, and his rifle. The arrow is pointing to the rifle barrel of the man in the bushes who possibly was the rifleman on the grassy knoll who fired that shot. Another view taken by another photographer. Again, you see Mrs. Kennedy trying to exit the vehicle from behind, being pushed back in by her bodyguard. Number of witnesses on the scene rushing towards the vehicle. In this section, the man standing on the far right of the wall there is Abraham Zapruder, the photographer who took the original photos. The arrow here is indicating what was very likely the rifleman on the grassy knoll, the man who fired the shot which penetrated Kennedy's throat from the front, not from behind as the Warren Commission would have you believe. Very interesting note also that the motorcycle policemen were told to remain behind the car at all times. Here you see the passenger in the front turning back, looking at the president. Instead of jumping back to assist him, he turns forward. The driver's now rotating. The weapon comes into view and he fires. You'll see this repeatedly in these sequences. Kennedy's been shot in the throat. He's leaning to his left. The driver now begins to rotate. His left arm comes over his right shoulder and he fires now. Again, you see the driver rotate. You see the weapon come into view. He's rotating again. The weapon is in view. He fires. You can clearly see his head turning and his arm and the weapon extending into view over his right shoulder. Many of the witnesses indicated that the car slowed almost to a virtual halt at about this point. And here in the normal version, you see how much more quickly it is speeded up. It's much harder to determine. Many of the people who asked the question why Jackie Kennedy did not report this, it should be fairly evident that she wasted no time in getting away from the attacker.
The possibility that the driver, William Greer, might have shot Jack Kennedy, of course, is profoundly disturbing, but it's not without foundation. For example, Mary Mormon, who was located very close to the limousine at the time that the shots took place, said that she thought some of the shots had come from inside the limousine. Clint Hill, in his own summary of his experience in Dealey Plaza, said that the final shot sounded very different from the other shots and sounded like that of a revolver impacting on something hard, which is very consistent with the Cooper scenario. Moreover, Mrs. Earl Cabell, the wife of the mayor, reported that she smelled gun smoke, gunpowder, as she traveled through Dealey Plaza, which had been most unlikely in the event that all of the shots had been fired from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building. Nevertheless, there are other reasons that count against the Cooper hypothesis. Several experts on the assassination, for example, disavow the conjecture that Greer shot Kennedy. These include Josiah Thompson, the author of 6 Seconds in Dallas, a frame-by-frame study of the film. Robert Grodin, one of the leading experts on the photographic evidence in the assassination. And even David Mantic has told me in conversations that we have had that he does not believe that a close study of the Zapruder film sustains that interpretation. However, whether or not Greer participated in the assassination as a shooter, there are very strong reasons to believe that he was involved in the conspiracy itself. For example, once the limousine had entered Dealey Plaza, William Greer was the only person who could possibly have saved Jack Kennedy's life. He could have done so simply by stepping on the accelerator and moving the vehicle out of Dealey Plaza at high speed, which would have made it impossible for him to be shot. Also, it was very important to slow down the limousine. Shooting a moving target is very difficult, even under the best of circumstances. And it would have been imperative for the conspirators to have had a plan to slow down the limousine in order to make it more likely that they would be able to land fatal shots. Plus, finally, there was an absolute necessity of success. it is not at all unreasonable to believe that the conspirators would have most feared the idea of a wounded but not fatally wounded president, because that would have surely unleashed the full powers of the government under Attorney General Robert Kennedy to leave no stone unturned in discovering what was going on, and in that case the conspirators would have been at grave risk of exposure. So the possibility of having someone in a position where they could administer a coup de grace, were the president wounded but not yet dead, I think must have been an important part of their plan. Nevertheless, the Zapruder film has to be treated with great caution, not least of all because there are significant reasons for believing that it has been subjected to extensive editing. For example, here is an FBI memorandum which reports that FBI agent Robert Barrett, interviewing Abraham Zapruder on the 4th of December 1963, learned that his camera was fully wound, was set manually on maximum zoom lens. The camera was set to take normal speed movie film of 24 frames per second. The control buttons for the zoom lens were not touched once he started taking photographs of the presidential motorcade. Abraham Zapruder's secretary, moreover, was standing beside him on the low colonnade and helping him to keep his balance as he took the motion picture, and reported that once he depressed the trigger for the camera that he didn't let up until the car had sped out of sight. Now, if the camera was operating at 24 frames per second, then that's very strong evidence that it has been extensively edited, because the version that we have available to us now is only runs at 18.3 frames per second. In that case, even though what we have available is in excess of 400 frames, that suggests that over 100 frames might have been excised from the film to produce what we have available for us today. Moreover, David Lifton, in his important book, Best Evidence, has reported in an extensive footnote on pages 555 to 557 that he has discovered that the film was in the hands of the National Photo Interpretation Center run by the Central Intelligence Agency already that evening, and that the CIA produced one original and 3 copies, precisely the same number that were struck of the Zapruder film earlier in the day. So that's very strong circumstantial evidence that the film we have in our hands today may have been manufactured by processing the original into what we have available. Moreover, there are many internal indications that the film itself has been edited. Let me mention several, and then you can take a look at the film again. Zapruder began by taking a photograph of his secretary and another woman or two, and then got up on the colonnade. He began photographing as soon as the motorcycle patrolman came into view. Well, you'll observe that there's a big gap between the frames involving the motorcycle patrolman and the presidential limousine, which is suddenly in the foreground. What this means is that a major segment of the film has been edited out that would have shown the limousine making that very strong 120-degree turn, left-hand turn onto Elm Street off of Houston. In making that turn, many witnesses reported that the limousine had to slow down practically to a stop and that it nearly went over the curb at the time. Of course, if that had been true, then the president would have been maximally exposed to any gunman who was at the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, where Lee Harvey Oswald was allegedly awaiting him. It is difficult, even impossible, to imagine that the president could have been so exposed to that gunman at that short range, and the gunman resisted shooting at him. After all, he would have given up the best possible shot for much more difficult shots he would have taken later under that scenario. It's therefore very reasonable to believe that those frames were excised because it would have been so obvious. Moreover, if you watch the right front wheel of the limousine, there's a man with a hat who's about the 7th person away from the Stemmons Freeway sign. And when the right front wheel of the limousine coincides with his hat, there's a jump of several frames. In addition, of course, when the limousine starts to disappear behind the Stemmons Freeway sign, there's a very significant splice that Life magazine claimed one of its technicians had inadvertently affected on the film. This, of course, is extremely difficult to believe because here you have Life magazine, surely the world's foremost photographic journal, in possession of what is surely the world's most precious piece of film, suggesting that one of its technicians didn't handle it properly and caused this very serious damage to the film that covers damaged about 5 frames between what are known as frames 207 to around 212. Then subsequently, around the time of the fatal headshot, there appears to have been a great deal of editing. For example, involving Jackie's motions, and thereafter, immediately thereafter, it's entirely plausible a great many frames have been excised. If you study the Connolly's motion, they seem to move all too fast, entirely too fast, immediately after the fatal shot to the president's head, in getting down and climbing behind William Greer's seat. Plus, William Greer's head, as some students of the film have observed, appears to snap back much too fast. And in addition, Cooper, you have no doubt noticed, talked about a man in a kind of a hat, a man in a hat with a rifle, who appears to be in the vicinity of the fence line on the grassy knoll. Now, he tended to identify that man with someone who may well have been yet a separate shooter who was much closer to Abraham Zapruder's position. Well, separate those two individuals as having been two different and distinct individuals. It is the case that on the Zapruder film you can see this little man in the hat, but he disappears after only a frame or two. In other words, much too fast if the film had not been edited there. So there's quite a lot of evidence, I think, internal to the film that the film has indeed been edited. I'm going to show you the film 2 times more and take a look at some of these features of the Zapruder film as we go through it together and see if you notice the same things. There's a secretary. Here come the motorcycle patrolmen, continuous from here. There's a splice. There's a presidential limo. There's a splice going behind the Stemmons Freeway sign, shots ringing out. Kellerman turns around. Greer turns around. Greer turns around again. The limousine speeds off. Let's watch it once more, see what you see. There are the secretaries, the motorcycle patrolmen. We're about to see the big splice. All of a sudden the limo will be there. See if you see the man with the hat. There it was, jump. There's the Stemmons Freeway sign, splice, shots ringing out. Kellerman turns around, Greer turns around. Watch the Connollys this time. Watch the Connollys. See how they scramble, how they're down behind Greer. The limousine pulls off. To my mind, the most striking evidence in support of the Cooper hypothesis that Greer might have shot Kennedy is the motion of the Connollys. I mean, imagine he's lying across the seats, leaning on Nellie with 5 different wounds. He has a shattered rib, a shattered wrist, and yet, nevertheless, something frightens them so much that they both move very, very fast down behind, hide where exactly? Behind Greer's seat. That's where they hide. To me, that's very striking. Now, you do not have to believe that Greer shot Kennedy to believe that Greer was involved in the assassination for reasons that I have described. Yet there are other indications that go far beyond what you've seen here in the visual evidence that suggest Secret Service complicity in the assassination of Jack Kennedy. Here is a list of some of these considerations. Number 1, no protective military presence. Ordinarily, military intelligence units in the immediate vicinity of cities where the president will visit are contacted and activated, and a strong military presence is displayed in the city. This qualifies as a form of crowd control, where soldiers in civilian dress are distributed throughout the city and help to keep the crowd back. If you think back to the crowd in Dallas as the motorcade was proceeding through the city, you'll observe how the crowd was overflowing into the streets, which was an obvious violation of Secret Service policies and could not possibly have taken place had there been a proper military intelligence presence in the city. But that wasn't the case here. Number 2, no coverage of open windows. Once again, many spectators were peering out of open windows, and no attempt was made to keep them secure, nor were marksmen placed at strategic locations where they could provide protection for the president had anyone sought to open a window or take a shot at the president, which of course took place subsequently in Dealey Plaza. Number 3, the Dallas Police Department motorcycles were not in proper position. This is quite striking. Anyone who has ever observed foreign dignitaries in motorcades will notice how well they are protected by motorcycle patrolmen. Charles de Gaulle is a conspicuous example. Whenever de Gaulle traveled anywhere in France, he was surrounded by motorcycles and traveled at a high speed that would have made it all but impossible for anyone to fire successfully at him with a rifle. Number 4, Secret Service agents were not riding on the limousine. The limousine was equipped with special steps at the back. On about 4 different occasions during the motorcade, Clint Hill actually rushed up to the presidential limousine and positioned himself at the back of the limousine to provide extra protection. And yet, by the time the limousine got to Dealey Plaza, there was no Secret Service protection on those steps at the back of the limousine. Number 5, strikingly, the limousines were in improper sequence. It's completely inappropriate to have the president exposed by being in the lead limousine. The president should be somewhere in the middle of the motorcade where he is afforded optimum protection. What should take place in an ordinary motorcade, and I'm certain that if you study other motorcades you will find this is the case, that the various dignitaries involved are positioned in reverse order of rank so that the lowest ranking dignitaries appear at the beginning of the parade or motorcade and the higher ranking dignitaries come toward the middle or the end. That way the roar of the crowd increases as the parade passes by, so that first earliest in the motorcade should have come the mayor of Dallas, and somewhat later should have been the vice president of the United States, and only much later, somewhere toward the middle, should the president of the United States come by. Otherwise, you have a tremendous roar as the president passes by, and the crowd subsides and even begins to leave the motorcade, having seen the person they really came to see by the time that the vice president and the mayor come forth. In fact, the way in which the limousines were supposed to have been organized, the press vehicles should have been immediately after the Secret Service limousine protecting the president. But in fact, the way in which this motorcade played out, the press, the national press, was left way behind in vehicles as far back as 7, 8, and 9, so that in fact no member of the national press, apart from James Alchins, as we have observed, was in the position to take photographs and cover the events in Dealey Plaza in the way they would have been able to had they been in an appropriate position. That does not appear to be an accident. Number 6, an improper route was utilized. If you study maps of Dallas, you discover that there were at least 2 alternative motorcade routes that could have been employed. One would have been to continue up Main and go straight through Dealey Plaza without turning right on Houston and then turning 120 degrees onto Elm Street. By proceeding straight up Main Street, you would have intersected Industrial Boulevard, which would have provided easy access to the Trade Mart where the president was supposed to give his address at the lunch hour. Or alternatively, the motorcade could have proceeded up Elm Street instead of come up Main Street. By proceeding up Elm Street, there would have been only this slightly 30-degree curve on through Dealey Plaza, which would not have required that the motorcade slow down. In fact, what happened was a choice of a motorcade route that was clearly improper and violated Secret Service policies. Number 7, limousine took more than a 90-degree turn. And of course, a very strong indication then of the improper choice of motorcade route is the fact that the limousine did have to take that 120-degree turn off of Houston Street and onto Elm, as I've described before. Surely there are good reasons, and it would have been obvious to anyone familiar with protective services for presidents and other dignitaries that the motorcade should never have taken a turn of that kind, which brought the presidential limousine virtually to a halt directly in front of the Texas School Book Depository building, where if there had been an assassin lurking there, he would have been highly vulnerable to being assassinated. And number 8, the limousine slowed nearly to a halt. I'm talking about now actually in Dealey Plaza after the shots began to ring out. Several witnesses have testified that the limousine was brought by Greer virtually to a halt after the shots had begun to ring out. Now, that turns out not to be Greer's testimony, as we're about to discover, but there's several individuals who have testified that the limousine was brought to a halt, and that that obviously would have been completely improper. The right response would have been to immediately accelerate and get out of there as fast as possible. Number 9, Secret Service agents were entirely unresponsive. Only one member of the Secret Service responded remotely appropriately, and that, of course, was Clint Hill. Observe the behavior of everyone else. They might as well have been untrained bystanders to judge from their performance. They looked around and did not react, and in fact, never got off a shot. There was no return fire in Dealey Plaza. You might have thought they were merely spectators at this event to judge from their performance, and yet these are supposed to be highly trained professional Secret Service agents. Number 10, the limousine stopped for 30 seconds. I was astonished to read in Robert Grodin's book, The Killing of a President, that after leaving Dealey Plaza, the Secret Service limousine stopped at the entrance ramp to Stemmons Freeway for nearly 30 seconds while William Greer was obtaining information and instructions from the lead vehicle as to how to get emergency care and get to Parkland Hospital. This is astounding for at least 3 different reasons. One is, after or in the midst of an assassination attempt, Greer would have had no way to know whether other assassins might be positioned in the vicinity of the entrance to the freeway, and therefore he was running the risk of exposing not only the president but the other occupants of the vehicle to possible further harm. In the second place, the Secret Service driver of the presidential limousine has only a few primary responsibilities. One of those, of course, is to be completely knowledgeable and familiar with the motorcade route. The other is to know where to proceed in an emergency, to already possess prior knowledge of the location of the nearest emergency care facilities, in which case there would have been no need to stop. But number 3, if Greer in fact did not know where the emergency facilities were located, then he was in radio contact with the other vehicles and could have obtained the information he needed by having Roy Kellerman obtain it over their radio system. There would have been no need whatsoever to stop the limousine. So I find this a very disturbing event that the presidential limousine should have stopped for a period of time of that kind at that point. Number 11, the limousine was washed at Parkland. One of the first activities of William Greer after the presidential limousine arrived at Parkland Hospital was to obtain a bucket and a sponge and water and begin to wash the blood and brains off of the presidential limousine. I don't need to explain that this was destroying evidence of a crime, in fact an assassination of the president, and made Greer already at that point an accessory after the fact. Number 12, the limousine was dismantled and rebuilt. You might have thought that this presidential limousine, which after all was a crime scene on wheels, would have been preserved for posterity and would eventually have made its way to the Smithsonian Institute as a reflection of a crucial turning point in American history. But in fact, that is not what happened. The limousine instead was sent back to the Ford Motor Company and was completely dismantled and rebuilt and repainted, even though LBJ, JFK's successor, never rode in that limousine after it returned to government service. Number 13, and equally strikingly, Greer subsequently testified falsely. The testimony that William Greer gave in a summary of what he did, his conduct and experiences in Dealey Plaza, indicates that he hit the accelerator immediately after the second shot. By the second shot, he means the shot that hit John Connally. So according to William Greer's testimony, he hit the accelerator and moved the vehicle out of Dealey Plaza promptly upon the impact of the second bullet upon John Connally. But as you have now seen from the Zapruder film repeatedly over and over, that manifestly was not his behavior. In fact, he was testifying falsely. Those are 13 indications of Secret Service complicity, and in fact there are others. For example, number 14, the switched windshields. We have discovered that Richard Dudman observed what appeared to be a through-and-through hole in the windshield, and that the Alchins photograph now shows us what appears to be a shot of that kind. And yet, the windshield that the Secret Service has produced shows only cracks from a fragment fired from behind, which creates a very strong presumption that the Secret Service indeed did switch windshields and did participate in that way in the assassination. And 15th, Kellerman, now remember, at Bethesda Naval Hospital, took the photographs, exposed but undeveloped, and the x-rays, both exposed and developed, into Secret Service custody. These photographs and x-rays were constantly thereafter in the custody of the Secret Service and the President's personal physician. And yet when they surface again in 1978, 1979, after the House Select Committee inquiry, they appear to characterize the wounds in ways that are completely at variance with the descriptions that were provided at Bethesda and at Parkland. Once again, very strong, disturbing evidence of Secret Service complicity. There thus appear to be 15 very strong indications of Secret Service complicity. I think that many of these are conclusive indications that the Secret Service was involved in the, if not in the conspiracy to kill Jack Kennedy, at least in the cover-up of the assassination. Nevertheless, suppose we were to treat them probabilistically and to say, well, some of these things might occur now and then. Suppose we go down our list and say, ask ourselves, say, with respect to the original 13 factors, could we treat those as 13 independent factors that have a certain improbability in order to assess how improbable it would be that they should have all occurred together in Dealey Plaza on that day? Well, some of them might have an innocuous explanation. For example, that the Dallas Police Department motorcycles were not in position. Possibly that's something that sometimes the president discouraged. Possibly he suggested that he did not want the motorcycles to be covering the presidential limousine so tightly because they'd interfere with spectators communicating him by waving and so forth. And obviously, number 7 and number 8, the limousine taking its more than 9-degree turn and the limousine slowing nearly to a halt in Dealey Plaza are not independent, but rather are part and parcel of an improper route being utilized. If we were to subtract those 3 factors, we'd still be left with 10. Well, suppose we adopt a simple statistical model of the following kind. Suppose we assume, as you can see here displayed on this table, that each of these events is an independent event having an improbability of 1 in 10. That is to say, suppose we take each of these events as being something that occurs maybe 1 time in 10. Then the question becomes, with what improbability would we have, say, as 8 of these events occurring on the same occasion together with an improbability of 1 in 10? Well, by looking it up on the table, you discover that for 8 of these events to have occurred simultaneously in a single event would have an improbability of 1 followed by 8 zeros, or in other words, 1 in 100 million. In other words, only 1 time in 100 million would you expect 8 events having an improbability of 1 in 10 to occur together. And if you take 10 of these events, 10, by discounting the ones we just discussed, for example, then the improbability of those 10 events occurring altogether would have an improbability of 1 in 10 billion. 1 in 10 billion. Well, in science, we characteristically reject an hypothesis when it has an improbability equal to or greater than 1 in 20. The evidence here, I suggest, is conclusive that there was Secret Service complicity in the assassination of Jack Kennedy.